Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 504 of 6 Pixels of Separation, the Mirum Podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's Sunday, March the 6th, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Douglas Rushkoff, and I write books about media, technology, culture, and these days, economics.
How are you?
I'm all right. I'm in a little bit of a tizzy. Today's the day that my new book came out, so it's a kind of madness. I'm in computer media, self-expressive. Uh, I don't want to call it hell, but it's like living in a weird audio idea house of mirrors, where I don't know what I've said and what I haven't. It's
But
interesting.
I'm curious about that. Is that because do you have a better time formulating the ideas and putting them out there, whether it's a book, a documentary, or whatever you do, versus then having to talk about it? Is there an uncomfort in like, oh, I got to now explain this to people again?
I mean, in a way, I remember when I was in the band called Psychic TV. I, unlike everybody else, I liked the rehearsal room better than the performance because the rehearsal room was that process of discovery and the aha and the building things and seeing the progress and trying new ideas, whereas performance felt much more set. It was like, okay, now this is for them. This is for those strangers, and it loses a certain intimacy and it's different. You don't hear as well. It's never an ideal setting. You don't ever hear yourself as well in a stage setting as you do in some little studio. So it feels a little bit like that here I wrote this book and the book is written really well. And if someone takes 7 or 8 hours, they can really, really, really get what it is that I'm saying. And all the various interviews and things and talks, it feels like I'm either trying to jam a bigger idea into a smaller space or really doing propaganda, just trying to get people to read the book. It's not even selling the book that matters to me as much as people reading the book. So even if they own it, I'll do a talk for a room of people where 100 books have been given to them by the sponsor, by me or the publisher, and I'm still making the argument. So I think I have gotten good at understanding, though, that there's ideas in the book that I can share, vocally or on the radio or even in a 5-minute piece, but implementing the ideas, actually having enough kind of ammunition to be able to argue for them at work or implement them in your business, that's kind of a training that you can only get spending a few hours with the material.
So I'm curious about this book because we've been friends a while, and in the process of this book, we were throwing back name title ideas, content ideas. We sort of had some
Right.
back and forth, and it wound up being called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. And in reading the book and the conversations we had building up to the writing of it, am I wrong in feeling that this was a bigger book than you thought?
Yeah, it was a bigger book than I thought. Originally I was thinking of it as I'm going to write a kind of a simple handbook to the digital economy so that all of these people out there, whether they're investors and businessmen and stockbrokers and startup developers and people looking for jobs and starting their own little businesses, so they would understand the contours and the biases and the tendencies of the digital economy, so they'd know what to get involved in and what not. So they could, I was even thinking of it at first, just if they could just understand sort of what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin isn't, what Bitcoin portends and what it doesn't, that would almost be enough if I could show them, here's Bitcoin, here's the economy of likes and social media and why that's kind of silly. Here's the way the startup thing works, and people take too much money, and then they have to hit a home run. And so it would be pretty simple to say, look, the digital economy is working this way, and we don't really like it so much, but it could work this way instead, and wouldn't that be more fun? And let people know about alternative currencies and platform cooperatives where workers own the platform, and nice. But then as I was writing, usually I'm writing 10 years ahead, but as I was writing, reality really caught up with me, and in a good way for a change. So, the perversions of the digital economy started to become so clear to people, and the problems of the digital economy became so acute for so many people with this extreme disparity of wealth between the winners and the losers, between the head of the long tail and that long, awful part of the long tail, that the book became more of it became more political, more of a rallying cry, more pointed, because I really needed to make a strong argument on behalf of this vast majority of people who are not participating in the tremendous wealth creation.
Well, one sort of undertone, and feel free to completely shoot me down on this, is that I feel like, in a way, with this book, it's angrier versus being more skeptical. And in the past, I think you've been more skeptical or curious, and in this one, I sense like there's an undertone of like anger, like we're almost beyond the pale here if we don't wake up.
Well, I don't know if it's anger as much as urgency. I mean, I'm certainly I'm trying to help people understand the anger around them. So I do believe that if we don't change what we're doing, if we don't change the contours of the digital economy pretty quickly, that we are going to have unrest, of a sort we might not like. The anger fueling Bernie Sanders is very similar to the anger fueling Donald Trump. That people feel disenfranchised, and they don't understand how the stock market can go up and everybody still do so badly. The notion that you or I or someone living in a mission district of San Francisco are going to participate in the startup economy and hit a home run, is starting to feel like buying a lotto ticket at the bodega with your Social Security money. That it's not probable. It's probably not even possible. And
But
I guess I am.
But what makes that different than the promise of the American dream? Or like when we hear this, I'm always like, it's like I almost feel like we sometimes say kids these days. And it's like, well, every generation says that. And when weren't people disenfranchised? And when weren't people, you know?
People have been disenfranchised since the beginning of the industrial age.
Right.
It's part of what industrialism was invented to do, to disconnect workers from the value they're creating, to disconnect consumers from producers so that we are devoted to brands instead of other people, and ultimately to alienate people from one another so we make up for our sadness and loneliness with product purchases rather than spending meaningful time with other people off the books, which is a drain on the growth-based economy. So that's always been true. The difference is that in a digital economy, these effects have been amplified. The opportunity of digital technology was to change all that, was to create much more of a peer-to-peer economy where people could exchange value with one another. And even in the early dot-com days, we saw the rise of companies, for better or for worse, companies like eBay, which unleashed a lateral economy between people. They were creating and exchanging value, so much so that then Jack Dorsey had to come up with PayPal so that people could exchange value in a more reasonable way. And PayPal actually disrupted banking to the point where it got regulated and they had to charge a fee, which they weren't even charging. They were making all their money on the float originally. Just holding money in escrow for 3 days was enough for them to have a great business plan. But that can't be allowed. You can't just let people exchange without paying up to the ACH, the clearinghouse for banking. There's a monopoly on money in this country. And then what happened was a few companies grew really fast online. There were a few billionaires from Steve Case or Mark Zuckerberg or some of these companies grew so fast that a whole lot of people got interested in getting one of those. If I could get a company to go from 100,000 to 5 billion in 18 months, I'm going to be really, really, really rich. So there's a huge marketplace, a huge industry. It's our whole economy really at this point of investors using a shotgun approach to invest in zillions of these little companies and hoping that one of them is going to turn into the next Facebook. But even turning into the next Twitter turns out is not enough, right? So Twitter is here making $500 million a quarter on 140 characters. And that, because of the amount of VC that was put into it, that's considered an abject failure by Wall Street. And this useful company that's doing great things for lots of different people is likely going to have to pivot into something that's not nearly as useful for any of us in that last ditch attempt to become, $100 billion company instead of a $10 billion company.
But what's the other side of that? Is the other side of that also, so yes, there's that sort of financial business infrastructure underneath it, but then there's also the sort of temperament of humanity where if we're comparing it to other things where people are online and sharing, people are either flattening, doing it less, getting more value somewhere else, and the sort of heat that it feels on the business side is also tempered by humans typical sort of standard, like not interested in the shiny bright object anymore or finding value somewhere else.
Well, we'll see. I mean, it's hard to find value somewhere else when there's a virtual monopoly in a particular industry. So, what Amazon did to books, say, isn't going to go away. Even if Amazon goes away, it'll be a long time until the book industry kind of recovers from that scorched earth approach. The same way the FM radio dial in the US anyway, is still recovering from Clear Channel, which came in, destroyed the whole ecosystem, and then realized they can't extract any more money and left. And they're doing other things now. So, you look at something like Uber, and indeed, I do think companies like, there's an upstart called Juno in New York, which is basically the same service as Uber, except it's letting the drivers own the company. So instead of having to extract so much value and profit from drivers and their cars in order to deliver it up to venture capitalists who put in this money, they're going to let the drivers be half of the investment pool because they're going to accept the fact that drivers are investing their labor and their vehicles. So with less money to pay up, and with the money that is being paid up going to the people who are actually doing the work, they won't end up in the same problem as Uber, where Uber is just making their own drivers bankrupt. Uber is doing to drivers what Walmart did to its workers. It's not a good long-term strategy. There's already towns in America that the Walmarts are closing because the people have gotten too poor to buy stuff at Walmart. And now those towns are going to have to find and rebuild their local infrastructures again somehow, even though they're all bankrupted by one corporation coming in.
But isn't that word, the somehow word, the problem here? Because there's clearly this world of change. The work you've done, and I'm a huge fan of literally every word that comes out of your mouth. I mean, I even love the fact that people call you a media theorist. I think it's a great thing. The thing from the theory to the practice, though, becomes the big question mark for everybody. I mean, I read your work and I think, yes, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it. And I come to work the next day and man, I'm taking it.
Right. Well, you don't have to. I mean, that's the thing. That's why the book is filled, and that's why someone has to really read the book to operate differently. And you're already operating differently, whether you know it or not. I mean, you're not just helping companies figure out how to kill marketplaces in order to get short-term results. You're looking at the long-term prospects of the company. If you're working on someone's brand, you're thinking about how is that going to play out over the next decade, not just the next quarter. So that you're already doing something different than 99% of the people in your business. But what you can do, I mean, there's simple things you can do. Like if you are running a big company or a bank or an economy, you can begin to look at how do you, instead of optimizing for the extraction of capital, instead of looking at just how to optimize for increasing your share price or trying to make your company's value go up, how do you optimize for the circulation of currency? How do you earn the same dollar 20 times in the same community rather than just once, or rather than just taking it off the board altogether and sticking it in a frozen share price? How do you turn your company into more of a cooperative? How do you give your workers part ownership? How do you think about your company more like a family business, which is really developed to live over time rather than just a shareholder business, which as CEO, you're incentivized to increase the quarter at the expense of everything else? How do you do bounded investing, where everything that you invest in pays you 2 or 3 times, like the steel workers do with their retirement fund, when they, instead of putting it in the stock market, they invest in projects that hire steel workers? It's like, duh, now we make the same dollar 2 times. How do you reprogram the corporation to be able to have responsibilities to something other than share price? How do benefit corporations work and multi-purpose corporations, things that allow you to look at something beyond 3 months from now? What about guaranteed minimum income? How would that work instead of dispossessing people of their homes and tearing them down? How do you find a way to let people use the bounty rather than burning food every week? How can you, as a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, how can you start delivering value to shareholders as dividends rather than as share price? Well, then how do you start looking at lobbying tax policy so that instead of giving capital gains a free ride and charging people on dividends, what if we do the reverse in order to promote the circulation of currency rather than its extraction? So there's lots and lots of things you can do. And even if you're just a little cubicle person, you go into a meeting, if you've read a book like mine and you understand all of these possible things we can do, then you're in a position to innovate. Then you're in a position to say, well, why don't we try having a shelf in our big department store of locally produced goods? Or what if we take the parking lot of our supermarket and let it be a farmer's market on the weekends? You'll be in a position to actually argue for these things and explain why doing economic development of your constituencies is good for your long-term prospects, much better than putting everybody else out of business.
So is what's happening in your life and career in your field of study that there is this sort of promise of digital? Some of this promise, regardless of whether you espoused it or just came to be, is now intrinsically connected to every single part of it, and that's what leads you to being more on the economist side. Like you're sort of forced into that role because, well, now it is. It's not a thing where before we're going to talk about what digital natives are or if viral media is truly a thing. It's that sort of beyond the pale. So if you don't become the economist, if you don't think about the economy, it becomes really troublesome.
Yeah, I mean, a few things happen. I mean, it started back the day that AOL bought Time Warner, and the New York Times asked me to write the op-ed on that. And I wrote an op-ed which said that, oh, this is the end of the dot-com boom. It means that AOL's cashing in its chips and buying a real company. It's going to be bad for Time Warner because their regular real-world share price can't compete with AOL's inflated dot-com share price, and this is not going to bode well for anybody. And the New York Times said, we can't print that. That's pessimistic craziness. And everybody in our business section says that you're nuts. And of course it ended up to be true, but it was the moment that I realized that there is an economic operating system that's undergirding the digital operating system. So yes, we live in a digital age where we are now capable of seeing our world as a series of programs or a series of operating systems. And the fact that we can should empower us to see and reconfigure the economy to serve human beings. But then this is the thing I guess I'm upset about, is the people developing the most disruptive technologies out there. They're really happy to disrupt a particular industry like books or music or cooking or retail, but they don't disrupt the operating system underlying those businesses. They don't do anything genuinely disruptive. The minute they have a viable business plan, rather than executing it in a distributed digital fashion, which they're capable of doing now, we can bootstrap these businesses on almost nothing. They can be based on a laptop and the Amazon cloud. Even if you don't, who cares if you're giving money to Amazon at this point? It's just for the argument. You can
And who
scale
cares if
up.
you know what a cloud is?
You can scale up slowly over time, but they don't do that. The minute they have a viable business plan, they go running to Daddy at Goldman Sachs and say, "Oh, what do we do?" And then Daddy at Goldman says, "Oh, here's what you do. You do an angel round, then a Series A, then a Series B. And once you've gone and done that, once you've surrendered your company to Wall Street, it's like surrendering your restaurant to the mob. They don't care about your business living. They care about selling your business. Your business becomes the marquee on an exit strategy. And business after business after business, they sell them at the top and then they crash. Look at Tumblr. Tumblr gets sold for $1 billion to Yahoo, which is bad for Yahoo and bad for Tumblr. Here was a great thing. It was great. Now Tumblr's going to be taken as a loss, because and company after company, they sell on the peak number of downloads. They'll sell on that day, and then the acquirer makes nothing. Well, what was it for? What happened? So all of these great young developers are forced to pivot their business from the thing it should be and could be, from the sustainable revenue generating small monster it could be, from what the venture capitalists would call a single or a double, a company that makes $10 or $20 million a quarter. You have to pivot in the hopes that it becomes a multi-billion-dollar behemoth. And that's going to kill the business. It's going to kill 99 out of 100 of them will die. And the value they could have created, the wealth they could have created, is sacrificed to this greater goal of extracting wealth from the economy through the exit strategy of a company that doesn't even need to exist.
Do you think that like a company like, for example, Vice is going down the same road? I mean, it looks on the surface that, they take money from Disney, they take money from Fox. There's a close to $5 billion valuation there. But, I'm thinking about just yesterday, I was watching the Recode conference, a video of it, and Shane Smith and Spike Jonze were on there. I've known Shane, grew up together, wrote for Early Days at Montreal Guy. And he sounded really eloquent in his pronunciation that all that money does is give him the ability to take this content he's creating, which nobody else is doing, and making very, very relevant, and then his ability to license it and sell it and package it in other ways, and that's generating income and for brands to be aligned with it. And he seems to be sort of doing what you're saying, but at the same time, it looks like a bit of a similar model.
Well, we'll see. It's hard to know how much $5 billion is anymore. And what they expect back. So $5 billion, if they want a 100x return, then we're looking at the company, it's got to become worth $500 billion. So, I don't know. How big is Apple? $500 billion? Is it that big? Is it $500 billion?
Yeah, we're there for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So $500 billion, I guess CBS is not worth that much.
No.
So it's got to become a pretty big media entity to give the 100x return that the investors, are expecting. It all depends how he's situated it. Another way to look at it, if he really cares and he does have this mission at least short term, he could get 5 or 10 years of great media out of that, the false promise of delivering $500 billion to those investors before it's gone.
Right.
So there's that. I think it's probably he took too much money. Al Jazeera America didn't have nearly that much money, and they couldn't make it. And he's in some ways he's purchasing real estate with that money that he may not have enough media to support. So buying a whole cable channel. It was the noose around Al Gore's neck when he had Current TV. It was the noose around Al Jazeera America when they bought that channel. And now it feels in a way like Vice is moving into that storefront.
That's interesting. He looks at it like this is the sort of centralized hub of the content they're creating, reselling, repackaging, putting in other markets on mobile platforms, on TV platforms, and that, when he sort of lays the case out, and it was very impressive. I was really impressed by it. It was this idea that, who is the media company that's racing towards this? And he's like, I believe the person who wins that race wins all.
Yeah.
And he feels like there's nobody even competing with him.
It's possible. I mean, it's a sort of branded content universe. I mean, I've been asked to do a couple of Vice things before, and the thing that always impressed me about them was how little they expected me to work for. In other words, that the model is much more, well, Doug, kind of do this for free because having exposure as the narrator of a General Electric series on innovation is good for the sales of your books. And I mean, it's not fine. It's at a certain point, content creators have to start looking at, well, if I'm working, at what point is the thing that I'm doing the thing that I'm getting paid for? At what point does that happen? I mean, and I'm still talking to them now about maybe doing a podcast for them or with them. And, that could be a great thing. If we went and did a podcast together and do a straight revenue share, then that's a neat model, right? I'm bringing them content, they're bringing me audience, and we're sharing what we take in. So I'm really willing to see that work. And if they're doing that with hundreds of other people and hundreds of other kinds of media that can't really find a nook or cranny in the existing corporatized mediascape, then that's a good thing. If he can give me something, give the yes men something,
Well, he's also looking at it. It seems like he's running it almost the same way a book publisher might, or music, classic record company, which is, not that there's this huge advance you're going to earn off the advance. In this case, that advance is all but gone, but there is an opportunity potentially as it grows to have something there. I mean, it's an I mean, again, and there's tons of criticism about Vice. I wasn't really picking on Vice. It was more like their structure, because in the same instance as you talked about AOL and Time, Vice, Disney, Fox, and others looks like it could be somewhat similar. And I also was laughing because I'm, now the whole talk is that, Time might be buying Yahoo, and I thought, like, what a strange twist, because I remember, as you do, because we were both so involved in the space, in the AOL Time, like it was yesterday. And here's like Yahoo buying Time. I'm like, what an evolution of media, right? Like, it's crazy.
I mean, but the most important thing for your listeners to get, I think, is that the digital operating systems that we're developing and the apps that we're talking about and the way that they function and distribute value can't be separated from the debt structures of the companies that are building them. It's not, there's not a separation there. They are one and the same. Right. So if you have a company whose debt structure is based on providing a massive 100x return to some venture capitalist on the other end, then that's going to change the way your company does business, right? The less money you take, the more you can be based on flow, rather than stacking a whole bunch of capital. And that's really the main argument of the book, is that the industrial age worked by extracting money from people and places and turning it into share price. Now, that's not particularly consonant with digital technology, which tends to distribute value throughout a network. So if you can begin to capitalize your business in ways that are based more in dividend and flow, then you can start to make people in your network wealthy rather than poor. It's the difference between, Google, which on its YouTube service at least cuts in video makers on the profits that their videos generate, and Facebook, which actually charges you to reach all your followers with your video. Where the Google model, at least in spirit, if not quite yet in practice, the Google model is dedicated to helping you create and retain value through their platform, whereas the Facebook model is just to extract value from you with their platform.
No, I'd say there's a lot of nuances and subtleties in that overview of what's going on in the book and where you're thinking, but there's two major buckets that I'm curious about. One outcome of this is obviously, and we know this because it's backed by statistics and data and it's impacting the economy in a huge way, is that we actually also need less people to generate a lot more income. Like that's a huge component of the outcome of this too. It's not like Twitter, Facebook, and Google are employing the same amount of people to generate the income that they are currently as other companies have in the past. We have a growing global population. We've got all this infrastructure, and suddenly, oof, this is scary.
Right. I mean, we have the figures. The average disrupting digital business employs 1/10 the number of people as the industry it disrupted. So, Amazon, employs 1/10 the number of people that were required in a bookstore, or a Spotify versus a record industry, or any of them. That's scary, right? That means
It's
even
terrifying. And also
yeah,
because global population grows. And this is the part, and also global population grows. And if Facebook is right with internet.org or whatever, they become more connected. It makes the middle class happen sooner, but the middle class of what?
right. But that's why then we need people like me who can help us redefine the purpose of an economy. So what is work for? Work should be because we need something done. Right? That's not what's going on anymore. Now, work, employment, is a way of justifying getting a share of the spoils of our digital industrial economy. And because we are thinking of it in such an ass backwards way, we are, this very day, we are tearing down homes in California because they're in foreclosure. We can't just let people live in them because they don't have jobs. We're burning food every week in America to keep market prices high. We can't let the hungry just have the food because they don't have jobs. So jobs is not about getting stuff done. We have enough lawnmowers and snowblowers. We have enough stuff. We have a bounty of stuff. We have more than enough stuff. We're keeping our stuff in America. The growth industry now is storerooms for people to rent more space to store the stuff that they have in abundance, right? We have more than enough stuff. Our corporations have more than enough money. They're obese with cash. They can't allocate their cash. They can't deploy their cash. They're getting worse and worse at deploying the money they've accumulated. That's why they're in trouble. Corporate profit over net asset value is going down, not up, for 75 years. So what we have to do is start saying, well, what happens if we just let people have the food? Is that so terrible to say, look, no, we're not going to let people become rich. Don't worry. We won't let someone become rich without doing anything. But what if the drivers of Uber get a share in the company even after their jobs have been replaced by robot drivers? What's the crime in that, in letting them have dividends on their labor investment for having done the R&D for Uber? No crime in that. It's a good thing. How are we going to adjust to a world in which we don't need everybody working 40 hours a week in order to get everything that we need? And then how do we start to value the things that we do need, like taking care of your grandma and, walking people around and educating children and all the stuff that we can't really seem to find people to do or can't value with enough cash to do it. It's a society that we haven't learned to deal with this end of cycle, with this, ultimately with the success of efficiency.
So it's getting. Look, you and I do this when we jam a lot. We get very dystopian. So let's. Okay, I'm gonna
That's
go there.
utopian.
That's true. You're right. So fun. It's true. We're talking about utopia, but I want to sort of go to that the second part of what you're saying and where it's coming from. And this is a point that I had been feeling for a long time. I definitely felt got sort of really pushed forward in the book you wrote called Present Shock. I sort of felt it bubbling up more in me. And then, I saw you speaking a little snippet of this, and I thought this is exactly what we're talking about. When you talk about this in digital industrial economy, there is a certain exchange that's taking place right now. We all know what it is. It's free for data. And what are we going to do with this data? And again, as you wisely pointed out, and you're not the only one, I've talked about this for decades, is, well, the data is great because we're going to create more relevant and targeted advertising and media, and we're going to create better segments, and people are going to be focused on the stuff they like versus all this crap they don't want to see. And that's fantastic. But as you so wisely point out, everything now is about the data. Everything is about, that's the real economy. This digital industrial economy is driven by the data, and the output of this data is, let's call it advertising for lack of a better word. There's other things, but it's mostly advertising. The problem with this, again, you point this out, is 5% of our GDP is advertising. And it's not like that's going to exponentially grow, especially when you have a world where all of us are creating media, and we're creating, whether it's a podcast like mine or you're just on Twitter or Facebook, that is a form of media. So this is the thing I've been asking for years, and you asked the question too, and I'm wondering what you're thinking. But so what are we really talking about here? There's no way we could even take all this data and use it in a way that makes advertising efficient. It doesn't make advertising back to a scarcity model. It gives it a model of abundance. And then it's like we're broke on that already.
We are broke on that already. I mean, marketing and advertising's never accounted for more than about 4% of GDP, and that's being extremely generous.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really more like 1.2 or almost 2. But let's just say it could get to 4, where it's trying to be at now. The problem with advertising growing bigger than this, with all of us somehow trying to support our work with advertising, is then there's no one left to pay for the advertising. Right? If everybody's product, if bananas are really just a loss leader for the ads that you're going to put on stickers on bananas for milk, who's left to put the stickers? Milk and razor blades and soap are not big enough to support 95% of the economy through marketing. They don't care. It doesn't matter at that point. So the whole thing comes tumbling down. The long tail that we're talking about, this sort of the way that a digital economy spins so fast and has such intense feedback loops that it leads to 1 or 2 lottery winners at the top and millions of losers at the bottom with no middle. That happens to everything. So it's going to happen not just to musicians and writers and people who are creating little commodities. It's going to happen to advertisers too, and it's going to happen to finance. That's what they're realizing. That's what they're finally scared about, that they're being hoisted on their own petard. And that's, again, I'm sure it sounds angry. I don't mean it in an angry way. I mean it in it's all going to be okay way, because this is going to collapse. It's not going to work. It's not.
But what happens when you say it's going to collapse? There are people who worked very hard, and whether we're 1% or not, it's not really relevant. All of us have skin in this game. Whether whether you don't have any savings, which is, sad. It's sad for people to work their whole lives and not have savings, or if you do have savings, because if you have savings and you've accumulated, whether or not you're taking, as much part as we would probably like, if it implodes, we're all affected by this.
We are all affected, which is why, the path towards avoiding a rapid and painful implosion is the same as the path toward what do you do to prepare in case that's going to happen. And the strategies are the same, and it's got to be to develop your local networks, develop resilient businesses. Think of what you're doing as if it were a family business rather than a short-term business. Don't go meta. Don't think about selling your company. Think about keeping your company or what you're doing. Look at what value are you creating. And most importantly, and this is the rule I keep coming back to, how does your company help other people create value? If your company is a way that other people create value, then it's going to stay in business for a long time. If your company is something that extracts value from people, then it's going to die when people have no more value to extract.
So before you go, do you mean by that as a maybe it's a bad example, you'll tell me, but like Ford, for example, right? Ford has these big plants. Suddenly it's people who build auto parts, it's people who do tires, it's people who are employed by the government to do road infrastructure, it's insurance companies. It's if you look at the areas surrounding Detroit where Ford is, families have now moved there and lived there, and the local economy is supported by the people who live there because they're employed by Ford versus Uber or autonomous vehicles, which are just like they're just going to show up.
Right. I mean, it's a matter of supporting the economy around you. So if you're Ford and you have a parts maker, you could look at the parts maker in one of two ways. Either I'm going to nickel and dime him down to his last dying breath, and if he can't compete, then someone from China is going to make the parts or someone else. I don't care. Or you could think of, I'm in business with that guy, and I want to create a model where he is doing really well. That him doing well doesn't mean I'm not doing well. It's not that
Right.
zero-sum
Yeah.
corporate elimination of externalities thing. It's how do we create an ecosystem? Because if he's doing well and the economy's doing well, then there's going to be more people who can buy my cars. It's more back to Henry Ford's original idea that I have to pay my worker enough to be able to buy my car. And that's the same. Walmart has to keep its towns wealthy enough, and it has to keep the economies where it's operating healthy enough so that there's enough money for people to buy their stuff. And to not do that is really silly at this point.
So the other area that I don't know if I've heard you comment on, if you had, it's hard sometimes to keep track, is the people who've done exceptionally well in this world, call them your Googles, your Microsofts, your Amazons. These benefactors seem to be giving away 99% of their wealth. Is there anything there that points more in the direction of where you're going? Is there, or does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the fact that a Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg makes so many, billions or tens of billions of dollars that they have to give away 99% of it at the end doesn't mean they're generous people. It means they took too much to begin with. Right? They took too much, and
But
now
when you
they're
say
trying.
took too much, sometimes it's. Do you feel it's always by fault? Like I don't think these people are like, like are they really sort of like
Yeah.
scratching their twirling their little mustaches in an evil
No,
way?
it's by ignorance, not by fault. It's by ignorance of the underlying economic operating system. These guys are programmers, but they are blind to the operating system beneath their own. They've accepted corporate capitalism as a pre-existing condition of nature. The same way a kid who's been raised in a world with only Macintoshes is going to accept the Apple system as computer. They're not going to know there's another possibility. So by doing that, they've ended up initiating a very accelerated form of capitalism that leads to these huge and unexpected windfalls, and they don't know how to process it. If instead they structured their businesses like digitally distributed companies, then, well, Microsoft would be in a hell of a lot better shape than it is now, than it was from, chasing operating system and Internet Explorer monopolies and all the crap that they did. They could have been a value creator for others. You wouldn't have to give back that 99% in ways that now you're choosing to. I mean, that's what government was for. Was government supposed to spend a lot of time and energy figuring out, well, where do we need to deploy funds? It's not up to one trillionaire to decide, oh, well, now we're going to solve malaria, or now we're going to solve this. It's not really the way it should work. And once you've extracted that much, if you believe in the free market system, which I do, once you've extracted that much from the market, you can never deploy it as effectively as the market would have in its actual circulation.
I want to close off by this idea of, I mean, you're in this, you're talking about what you talk about in the book, this idea of the growth trap, that there's not necessarily a correlation between growth and prosperity and health. And it was one of those things that, I mean, again, you write so well that I sometimes feel like did I say it right or am I processing it right? Because it was such an awakening moment for me that again, it's like a hamster wheel. We got to grow, we got to grow, we got to do why? Because if we grow, we'll be prosperous, create a healthy company. And when you said that, I sort of stopped and realized it's true. Like just because you've had this tremendous growth, it doesn't mean that it's prosperous, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy either. And it's a strange thing to even, as I hear myself saying it, I'm like, it's somewhat weird to say.
No, growth for many of these companies is a bad thing, not a good thing. It's actually bad for them. If you look at Deloitte's shift index of 2011, where they showed that for the last 75 years, corporations have gotten bigger, but their ability to make money with their money has gotten worse and worse. So the key statistic, which is profit over value, is going down, 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 down to a very, very dangerous point. So they've taken all the money off the board. I went to it'll remain nameless. I went to a Fortune 100 soft drink companies
There's only two
meeting.
now. Okay, keep going.
I went to their annual meeting of their CEO and their executive vice presidents and all that, and they were talking about how the year before they had made like 4.7%, and next year they're going to make 5.3. They've got to grow by 5.3%. And these banners came down from the ceiling, and they had everybody chanting 5.3, 5.3, their target for growth. And I got up there to do my keynote, and I said, Jesus, if you guys, one of the 50 biggest corporations in the world, if you guys have to grow in order to be okay, then we are all fucked. I hope I'm allowed to say that on your podcast.
You always are, for sure.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Because that's what I said to them. And they kind of laughed uncomfortably. And I explained to them how they are really, crucifying themselves on this altar of growth in order to please an unreasonable shareholder demand for one of the biggest corporations in the world to find perpetual growth. There's no such thing as perpetual growth. You don't have to be a Malthusian pessimist to say that it should be okay for a company to find a sustainable equilibrium, the same way everything in nature does, from the coral reef to a forest to a marsh. You reach a size, and then it should be okay to be a living, circulating, full-grown entity. If nothing else, being a multi-billion-dollar company should give you the freedom to decide when you want to grow and when you want to contract. How do you want to live? Because you've got such a big war chest. You've got so much extra fat to live off through a hibernation period. If people are going to stop drinking soft drinks for a while, you don't have to think about how are we going to now grow our nutritional drink division fast enough to compensate for that. No, you're adjusting. It's okay. Breathe, relax. You're worth all of these billions. It's okay. So what I'm trying to do is teach them how do you do a new kind of shareholder communications where you get your shareholders to be happy making money in dividends rather than just making money on the growth of share price. How do you change our absurd taxation system, which punishes you for paying dividends rather than capital gains, and things like that. So you can get people out of this trap, which really is, it will kill us all if we don't figure out a way to get off it. And it's artificial. It was invented in the 1100s by some Moorish financiers who were trying to protect the failing aristocracy of Europe in the pre-colonial industrial era. And we don't have to live by those codes anymore. It's a social construction. It's artificial. It's not real. It's a way of doing business that worked really well for 500 or 600 years, but doesn't have to be the way we move into a sustainable economy.
But these people are making so much money now, and it's so even put aside the people who manage this money and who push this from side to side and are leveraging these assets, and they're just really moving zeros and ones in a very large gambling like scenario. The issue is that I look at it more superficially where I'm like, the public markets. Okay, so every 30 days, every quarter, whatever it is, you have to be better looking, prettier, skinnier, faster, make more money. Like you said, it's non-sustainable. We all know that, and yet we're all pushing at these public markets. And then so let's go private to sort of have a bit of the air of breathing and mindfulness that you're talking about. But there aren't companies that really do that. The only companies that actually make that shift back are ones who are struggling and flailing and don't, because it is still the metric. And I guess I'm not sure what my question is, but I feel like it's a drug that everybody is on. It's not just the handful that control the markets. It's down to the smallest cog in the wheel.
Right, down to the person who has a 401k plan and is depending on these companies to grow in order
Right.
to have retirement money.
Right.
But that person would be fine on dividends, actually.
Right.
If the company was willing to distribute its earnings rather than continue in the sort of insane process it's in. I mean, but the fact is, the ability of companies to show this steroidal artificial growth is hitting a wall. They're really now they're using most of these companies that are showing earnings are using what they call one-time write-offs.
Yeah.
Where they say, oh, it's just this quarter where we made money. If you don't count this, then we made money. Don't count what? Well, our industry.
Yeah.
What actually happened? We made money, and it's all fake. And activist shareholders are starting to understand even that much. But the companies will die. They'll go out of business. Bad things will happen. Eventually, you get in an Enron scenario. With all of these companies, and the ones that have constructed some kind of resilient infrastructure, the ones that have some level of competence that they haven't outsourced, the ones that still have a community of people who are getting wealthy off the company, those are the ones that are going to live through the coming squish. Which is coming. Look at the market, the up and down. I don't know what it's doing today, but just the fact that nobody knows what it's doing today versus yesterday, but they know it's going to be hundreds of points in some direction.
Or they just go, it'll bounce back. Don't panic.
Yeah, this is not a good. This is not a good moment for capital, and that's okay. All you have to do, it's okay. You've got some savings, and yeah, that's going to be at risk, and it's tricky, and you don't know. I mean, the dollar's not going to disappear. Don't worry. Your money will still be there. But capital, the dominance of capital in our economy has to shift. The traditional economists say that the factors of production are land, labor, and capital. And right now, the only one that gets paid back is capital. Land and labor has to be reintroduced into the value equation, or the whole thing comes tumbling down. And then land and labor become really important again. So it's going to happen either way. I'm just trying to make it as painless as possible.
I could speak to you for hours. I know you have to go. You're launching this book, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time when you give it to lowly old me, but I'm going to share it far and wide, my friend. Douglas, let people know where they can connect to you so they can find out more about the book. And I mean, your blog is full of great stuff always.
Yeah, just go to rushkoff.com and pretty much everything's there. Buy my book, get it through IndieBound or an independent bookstore if you can, to help support your own local economic infrastructure. Even if it costs you $1 more, I promise you that dollar will come back to you as a local economic activity that's more than worth $1.
I can't thank you enough. Thanks, Douglas.
All right, you take care.